All right, so welcome to the Right to Publish webinar on clarity and concision. And today we're going to talk about some things in communication and rhetoric. We're also going to talk about that in relation to uh, open AI and other kinds of generative softwares that you can use to do editing. We're going to talk about organization and flow at the macro level. We've talked about that already a bit. And so we're going to return to kind of what those elements are. We'll take a look at some examples. We'll take a look at some statements and kind of clarifications on the need for having a good sense of audience. And when you're editing, like who it is that you're thinking about. We'll talk about that sentence level, kind of micro editing. Um, some principles for concision, mostly for it comes out of science writing, but it's good for any kind of academic writing ultimately. I'll refer a few times actually to the writer's diet. And again, places where I don't remove Canvas, just know that it should be the Google course. All right. And if you're doing the what's Canvas/Google course, here it's just a short list of your editing plans. What have you edited, or what do you plan to edit the sentence level in your article? You can think about sentence bloat, which we'll talk about kind of like wordy sentences, right? Bloated sentences, redundancies, modifiers, needless words, verbosity. I love that. And complex terms, those kind of jargony terms that aren't defined and aren't necessary. All right. So when we're editing for clarity, think about like the big picture of everything that you know about your topic and how big that is and how much you can actually put into a manuscript for readers to read. And then how is it you need to even focus that down? That's into that point, and that kind of the clarity comes from you being able to fully articulate what it is that you want them to see through your eyes. So that's why that lens, but also notice how clear the image gets. And so this is just a metaphor, a visual metaphor for what we're going to be talking about in your writing today. And it's just a good tip, keep it simple. When we're thinking about how do we get to clarity and concision, ultimately, people want to know what it is that we know and have learned, and they want to understand it. So we need to keep it in terms that are simple for them. Not saying that it's simplistic at all. Not saying that we're speaking down. Right? This is not about changing your audience. You can have a highly sophisticated audience and still keep your writing simple. So that's just a good reminder of good communication for researchers. And again, thinking about like how it is that you're creating that sense of focus. You really want your readers to be able to see through your eyes, and that's what that language does. So one of the reasons also why we hem and haw over certain word choices, is this the correct word, is it not? If that feels sometimes a little I don't know, annoying or even exhausting, because it can be depending on what's happening in your writing process at that time. If you're working with collaborators and people seem to be, advocating for terms that you're like, I'm just not sure that's correct. That's where you're really working on that focus. You're really trying to get things clear and into focus, and you want to be able to convey it as clearly as possible to your readers. There are some just general good guides for communication. This one comes from the Science of People. If you're not familiar with it, it's a nonprofit, and it's a group where they study how it is that people interact largely. And Vanessa Van Edwards has a number of books out. Her Seven C's of Communication, I like it for us thinking about science writing too. She's talking about business engagement mostly, but you can use it for a number of other ways that you're thinking about engagement, probably including your own relationships, quite honestly. But that clarity, like, what's your purpose? Why are you wanting to connect with that person? That's first and foremost. That concision, that's second. It's like so key. So clarity and concision are first in her kind of like, these are the seven kind of basic things that we need to have in communication. That concision, keep it short so people can pay attention. You know me, I have a tendency to just wander on with my words. And sometimes if I'm doing it on the page, I can always edit it back before somebody else reads it. If I'm doing it in person, it may be harder for you to follow. Concrete, creating a vivid picture of what it is that you're talking about so that it seems tangible and real to who it is that's reading. Is it correct, right? Is it accurate? That's another reason why we take our time and go through our drafts in multiple ways. It's also one of the challenges that we know about using AI and then just accepting all changes that it may not be correct. So you are the authority on that text. Making sure that it's coherent. This is the arrangement, kind of that big picture. We'll talk about that when we talk about macro editing. Is it complete? It needs to be just complete enough for you to know that you have done your job for that particular publication, for that particular work and project. And then thinking about courtesy. I like this last one as well because it reminds us that when we put our work out there, that we are engaging with other people in our field. It may not seem like it, right? It seems like publication, publication. It's like this thing and this product that we need to get out and that the product is there. But really, that product is text and it's a place of engagement. And so being open and honest and friendly and kind of clear with that. There's some fields that wind up being more, I don't know, confrontational maybe or argumentative. It depends on the discipline. I know that, for example, history, one of the reasons why they have so many footnotes or endnotes, depending on which style guide they're using, is that that's where a lot of the conversation behind the scenes between historians happens, is in those footnotes. And they can get a bit rancorous and sometimes they're actually not as courteous, right? So you can think about how it is that people address disagreements within the field, for example. All right, let's talk about AI programs and notice that Grammarly, by the way, has not always historically been an AI program. It's been a software system, but it has now AI capabilities. So not all of them are AI programs per se, but they have this kind of element of assist, and they really assist in being able to create clear and concise documents at the editing stage. But you want to see, like, when is it that you're going to be using, and just be aware of when it's most appropriate to use and what stage for editing. And notice that for something like OpenAI, ChatGPT, it could also be like Claude, right? Gemini. There are any number of these that are just kind of standing in for the OpenAI. But that in generating text, summarizing research, brainstorming ideas, and the editing writing, it has all of these kind of purposes. And yet for you as a researcher, you have to be the person, and this is in the yellow, like when are you going to decide to use that, or are you going to decide to use it? Are you allowed to use it based on the submission guidelines for where it is that you're going to be submitting? Early stages for idea development or brainstorming. This works only, by the way, if you are an expert in the field. There's a fair amount out there now in looking at learning, so that young learners, folks who are not already knowledgeable in a subject area, can't use ChatGPT in the same way, right? They're using it as a tool to learn concepts or to learn things. And at that point in time, it's not great for their writing either. If they're using it as a conversational partner, and they're brainstorming ideas, you can brainstorm with a colleague, right, and a peer in a classroom, and they could be giving you incorrect information, right, as a peer. The same thing can happen with ChatGPT, but then you have an instructor or you have somebody else who can oversee that kind of idea development in those stages. Expert stages, however, technically, we should, as experts, be able to look through and read through and identify if something's off, be able to look it up, right? If something reads and we understand, yes, this is in line with the scientific literature in this field, whatever, we can identify that. The late stages in the editing and polishing, this one, most journals that I've come across and looked at are allowing. You can use it to edit text and polish text. There is a risk, however, as we know, we've talked about this before with Kalita Thomas when she came and spoke from the libraries, that if you are dumping an entire manuscript into an OpenAI system, now you have released a document that is complete, it's out of your control, right? You don't exactly know. It's called the black box is what it's called. Okay. And it goes into the black box and you no longer have control over that document. So if you're using it for late stages editing or polishing for creating clarity and concision, my recommendation is to be very cautious about dumping in more than a little bit. I would be strategic in what it is that you put in and what you're asking for clarity. In the same way that when you ask for clarity, like feedback from an advisor or from a peer, You're sending it out and document, and you're saying, this is the length of my manuscript. This is what the topic is. This is where I think it's working out really well. And these are the places where I'd really like to have your feedback. Treat it kind of like that. Grammarly, if you use Grammarly, I know a lot of faculty, graduate students, postdocs use it on campus and have historically. It is now much improved from where it was before. It can do text generation as well, but historically it's been used for proofreading and editing. You can use it early on as well, but my recommendation is to continue using it as a kind of grammar check or style suggestions. And then we won't talk about illicit semantic scholars, Zoto or EndNote, but it is helpful and it is a reminder that if you're using these softwares, that just a reminder that you need to be tracking what you're using and how you're using, because many journals are now asking for you to submit and funding agencies as well, what it is that you've used and how you've used it. So when we think about editing and getting feedback, that kind of old school, like, oh my gosh, how do we figure it out and how do we make all those changes? It can be a little overwhelming. I think using something like Writer's Diet, where I've talked a little bit about Helen Sword's work in the past, where she has done studies of frustrated academic writers or stylish academic writing. If you look up Writer's Diet test online, she has an online version of a, a system. It's a software system. It runs on algorithms. It is not AI. It is not generating text for you, but it can do a diagnostic of your prose. So if you're looking to build your clarity and concision writing skills, and you're not sure where it is that you have some challenges in your writing, you can just dump in a portion of it. It doesn't keep it, and it'll give you a diagnostic kind of view. And so in this one, you can see where the verbs, it says it's in heart attack range. Actually, the nouns, the verbs, the prepositions, and the it, there, and this usage are all in the heart attack range for this 130 word sample. But I love that her terms are like, this is lean, right? This is fit and trim prose. This needs toning. And then all of a sudden you get into the flabby or the heart attack range. And so she's got a sense of humor, and know that it's done by a writer who works with writers. Ultimately, if again, going back to that, thinking about who you're connecting with, good communication is good relationship building, even when it's in the articles and on the page. And as a quick reminder, what that means is that you're going to focus less on your knowledge and more on the other person. One of the bits of advice that I got from my faculty advisor about the difference between writing a dissertation, or it could be a thesis, or degree completion versus sending out an article or sending out, revising, for example, perhaps a whole dissertation as a monograph for publication at a university press. The difference between those is the audience. The first audience for a master's thesis or for a doctoral dissertation is ultimately your committee. Right? You want to make sure that you have demonstrated that you know enough to be able to demonstrate that you have mastery of a field or area of study, and or that you are ready to be a peer in the field, and that you are, have earned the term title doctor. And so that audience of your committee, you have a relationship with them already. You kind of know what they're asking for, and they may be asking for things that other people out in the real world, reader world of your work, they don't want to know. They don't need you to demonstrate how knowledgeable you are. What they want you to know, they want to know what you've done, what you understand, and how it's going to be important to them. And so thinking about, what are you trying to convey to that person, right? What do you hope for them to get out of the work that you're producing? And I like Jay Sullivan's work on Simply Said and Communicating Better at Work. If you're looking for a good guide for being able to just figure out how to write emails or other things, this is got a great approach. I have used this actually with units on campus on how to send emails and how to do basic communications with other folks. The rhetorical situation more broadly, and this goes to writing studies, but we're going to keep it pretty simple, is that if you look at this Venn diagram that is the whole rhetorical situation, this goes back all the way to Aristotle, where you have a version of the writer, although he was talking about the orator, right? The subject, the audience. So what is it that you're writing about? Who are you to be doing the writing? And then who are you connecting with? And within each of those spaces and how those overlap, you'll find that there's a purpose, there's an exigence, right, on why it's important that you're writing that. And the purpose is that, what is it that you're seeking from the audience? Purpose, sometimes think about that. It's connected to your audience, not just to the knowledge, but to your audience. And then there's the genre, which is how you're going to present it. What's the structure? What's the organization? And in between all of those, when you pull all of that together, that's where you get your text, right? And that's broadly. And beyond all of that is the context in which you're writing, which is your field. So sometimes it's helpful to think about how all of those interact in the process of engagement with your text. And again, thinking about text and how it is that you present your information to the audience is part of that genre. So I'm going to take a look at a monograph. This is an advice book. And we're going to take a look at this book by Karsh and Fox on grant writing. And I love that it's the only grant writing book that you'll ever need. Top grant writers and grant givers share their secrets. And the opening paragraphs of this in the Finder's Roundtable 1 on grantmanship and the funding environment, it's in the best of times, right? In the worst of times, and in all the time in between, there are always grants to be had, which this may not be 2025, right? Friendly. And we hope that will never change for each of the previous 4 editions. And so the reason they're talking about the best of times and the worst of times is because we know that grant writing is a fickle and tricky endeavor, but also that this is not the first edition of this book. This is the 5th edition of this book. So if it's the only grant writing book you'll ever need, and that was their title, I love that they're kind of playing with ways that they can engage you as a reader and to say, okay, this is our 5th edition, right? We need to keep going through this. And here's a bigger version of it. For each of the previous 4 editions, we focused our interviews on grant makers' approaches to specific calamities current at the time, 9/11, Hurricane Katrina and Sandy, the economic meltdown of 2008, and ensuing financial crisis that we thought would affect the availability of grants from federal, state, and local governments and from private foundations and corporations. We had a strong hunch. In fact, we thought it was obvious that catastrophes of all kinds would diminish grant seekers' chance of obtaining more routine funding. And not surprisingly, we learned from the grant makers that this hunch was correct. For the current edition, we decided to take a more holistic view of grantsmanship, to look not only at the calamities and catastrophes, but to place the grants process in the context of the political, cultural, and social environment as well. As we write, the scene is tumultuous globally and well as naturally. And by the way, this is pre-2025, right? So that kind of uncertain environment continues. But I think you can get a sense, and just kind of as you listen to that and kind of ponder the words on the page, think about how they're connecting with you as a reader of this text. They're connecting to what it is that they've done in the past, to what it is that their circumstances in which grant writers write, to the present, right? And why it is that they're writing this additional edition. So I love that. You can do that the same way if you do a project summary or an article. We're not going to go through all of these in depth, but thinking about the different genres, those different ways that you engage, there are different structures for that engagement. And perhaps you're not going to be as personal. You're not going to be able to use personal pronouns, perhaps the we, right? And how it is that you're engaging with your readers. But you will have a structure that guides that interaction and that. So you can think about Hurricane Irma and how it resulted in extensive wind and water damage across Florida, damage to trees and forests. So in this overview, you already get a sense of landscape and what they're interested in and who they're talking to. Intellectual merit. Notice again, genre will structure a lot of how it is that you arrange what you're writing about. It's one of the gifts of AI that it can kind of suss out genre structures. Like if you ask it to write in the mode of a sonnet, it can give you a sonnet for the most part. If you ask it to write in the mode of an abstract or some sort of proposal, it can start writing in those modes. How effectively and how well it's connecting to your audience, that's a whole other set of questions. Right? Same thing here. You think about this is from the proposal, and then how that proposal then plays out. And this is the article that goes along with the funded proposal. that research illuminates causes of urban forest storm damage and it's valuable. And so this has a much different kind of opening and approach. We've talked about this before with storytelling in science with Joshua Schimmel's writing science book and the OCAR structure. This would be an OCAR structure. The proposal itself is a structure that where you start off with the action itself, right? So the Hurricane Irma is the action. And then here in the abstract for the paper, it's research that illuminates. So you can get a sense of even how it's directing. It's the very same content, by the way, very same content to specific genres and audiences. So when we're thinking about those genre considerations, we're really at the kind of big picture, those macro editing elements. And it behooves you to be thinking about how your work should be structured for your readers of that particular genre and document. Again, I think we have a lot of great support for how to structure it, but how to arrange those ideas. You're going to be the person who's in conversation with the audience on the page, being able to identify gaps within that big picture, not just at the sentence level, but really kind of like conceptually what's missing. That's helpful. And then redundancies. And some of you, who, if you're like me, are kind of a cul-de-sac writer, which is how my advisor called it. She's like, oh, you kind of write in cul-de-sacs, which return us over to the same ground before. And so I'd have to go through and eliminate all of those cul-de-sacs and those redundancies that I kind of covered, but we're covering in new ways. Micro editing, that's where you're working at clarity and concision now, not in that kind of big arrangement of the ideas structurally, but now at the sentence level. And we're going to spend a little bit more time with that because that grammar, the word choice, the order in which the words are arranged, that syntax, that makes a difference for how it is that your readers move through your document. And proofreading for spelling errors, punctuation errors, and typos. It'll be interesting to see what happens with proofreading. And folks, I'm assuming that many of us will have fewer spelling errors and punctuation errors and perhaps typos if we're using AI supported technology, but there's no, I don't think there's any guarantee. And I've seen enough coming through recently from journals that still have errors in them that we all need to have our own editors and proofreaders. So again, thinking about who you're writing to, what do you want them to see? You're going to have to edit with your readers in mind. There's a writer, Emma, I want to say Watson, but that's not the correct last name. It'll come to me. But she's a British novelist, and she talks about how she writes her first drafts for herself, and then she edits for her readers. And that's so that she can see what's on the page, and then she can think about what it is that they need to hear and read or what they would enjoy reading on the page. So there's some basic principles of concision. These are the ones that are geared primarily towards science writing, and yet at the same time, I think they're good for all writing. So Nathan Sheffield at Duke, the graduate writing school, he's the one who's writing to scientists, but I think it's good for all of us as academic writers. Omit needless words, so that excessive hedging, like maybe, almost, sort of, suggest, perhaps ineffectual phrases. Bring simple words to longer, more complex words. If you have to use a long, complex word, it just should be because that's the only word, right, that you can use for that expression. Using simple subjects. We will talk about subjects and verbs, a little bit of grammar here today, and using adjectives and adverbs frugally. So one of the tells, by the way, for me, at least when I get things like letters or crafted documents that seem to be AI generated, is the way it uses adjectives and adverbs, which is not always so frugal. To omit needless words, you kind of have to think about what's your purpose and how, right? Who's going to be taking it in, and that we use a lot of needless words. If we go through the recording that's of this talk right now and omit all the needless words, it's probably this talk will be 1/3 the length, right? We tend to be verbose in our speech, but if you're doing that on the page, it means you're making your reader do a lot of extra work. So think about what ineffectual phrases you typically use and then just take them out. I know that there's a tell for me, and it's things like to be sure. I write to be sure in my draft, and then I take it out because very rarely do I ever need to have it. Note that, or it should be noted that, or respectively, or it's important to realize, or so called. These are they often soften what we think is going to be something that's too direct, and yet notice that it should be noted that that's 5 words that your reader then has to read through to get to what your point is. So, or what you're noting, just note it. We'll go through this example quickly here. This is a short paragraph, but as discussed, the second reaction is really the end result, very large number of reactions. It's also worth emphasizing that the reactions do not represent a closed system, as R appears to be produced out of thin air. In reality, it is created from other chemical species within the cell, but we've chosen here not to model such a fine level of detail. One detail not included here that may be worth considering is the reversible nature of the binding of RNAP to the promoter region. It's also worth noting that these 2 reactions from simple linear chain, whereby the product of a first reaction is the reactant for the second. Okay. It's 118 words for this paragraph, and you can see based on what it is that we just talked about, it's like omitting needless words. As discussed, the second reaction is really the end result of a number of reactions, right? Or the result of a number of reactions. So the reactions do not represent a closed system. So if we go to something that's revised, you can get it down to 92 words pretty easily. Right? Second reaction is really the result of many reactions. Reactions do not represent a closed system, as R appears to be produced out of thin air. In reality, it is created from other chemical species within the cell, but we've chosen not to model at such a fine level of detail. One detail not included is the reversibility of the binding of RNAP to the promoter. These 2 reactions form a simple linear chain whereby the product, the first reaction, is the reactant for the second. Notice how, by just taking out all of the filler words, the ones that are not necessary for us to understand the point of the sentence, how it pulls all of those sentences with meaning together, and it becomes much simpler, much clearer for us as readers to take in. And we're not wading through an additional 20-ish words, right? Thinking about shortening paragraphs to simpler paragraphs, then also complex words to simpler words. This is one of George Orwell's famous recommendations, right? Never use a complex word when a simple word will do. John Lynch, he says, bad writers consider long words more impressive than short ones and use words like usage instead of use, or methodologies instead of methods, without knowing what they mean. It may be that you're talking about a methodology, which is much broader than your method, right? That kind of bigger kind of umbrella under which your method might be fitting in one of a series of methods and the type of methods. But really, yeah, figure out what you mean and use that word. So a method is a way of doing things, but that method is that system that follows in a particular discipline. In keeping your subject simple, just keep it to like what's the sentence about and what is it going to be doing or being. I know that some of you on the call have seen me do like the grant writing at the sentence level. That's where Jeff Willis and I go through and we do a special aims page on an NIH grant, and he goes through as the reader and says, this is what I'm seeing and this is what I'm reacting to as a reader, and this is why I'm unlikely to want to fund this. And I go through at the sentence level and I mark out all of the sentences and all of the verbs, and I show how the meaning is connected or disconnected through all of the sentences that Jeff has read through. Jeff is reading for meaning, and I'm reading for structure on those. But in this instance, if we just look at the subject of who or what the sentence is about, we've talked about this with abstracts as well. This sentence here, the sequences that had passed our filtering, trimming, and alignment with clausal 9, were scanned for conserved elements across mammals. The sentence is really about sequences were scanned, but notice how many words are in between. And we love to do this as academics. And because academics, we want to have the sequences be described as specific sequences. past our filtering, trimming, and alignment kind of with this uh, system here. And that modifying of sequences means that we have a lot of words in between the subject and the verb. Keep them simple and keep them closer together. So you could just say, our sequences were scanned, right? So, or the sequences were trimmed, filtered, aligned. The resulting alignments were scanned, right? Much simpler, much cleaner. Notice how close these subjects and verbs are. It meant taking something that was one sentence and turning it into two. So if you ever have a sentence that is just like in your way and you're like, why is this not making sense? See if you might have two sentences instead of one. Using those adjectives and adverbs, those modifiers kind of frugally. Very is perhaps one of the most commonly used. If you have very in your manuscript anywhere, you can do a find and just look and see how many times you use it. Take it out probably every single time. Same with that, right? This, there, it. There's some of them you can do a search for because it's very interesting, very important. You know, you can sometimes you'll find extremely in there. You can just take those out. Hedging, this is where we want to say these results suggest that something may possibly, right? It's we're a little uncertain. It reads, it's harder to read. Oh, thought I had an example of this one. But you could just say our method or our results note that our method identifies putative enhancer elements to whatever extent, right? Maybe there's a percentage, right, of accuracy that you can give. Using apps or those kind of word supports, the word generators, ChatGPT, right? Use them as a support for your learning and not as a crutch. And I want to go back to waste words with Helen Sword's Writer's Diet and just kind of finish up with that. And oops, there we go. It's in various forms. I have the book, by the way, if you're at all interested in a hard copy, old school book. If this is something that excites you, I have copies, so please reach out. I'm happy to share. But that web test, just look it up. But there's also a word app that you can attach to your own word and kind of download. And it's works by an algorithm, and it's not a AI tool, but it works with Sword's rules for strong prose, and it's use active verbs whenever possible, so that your reader can see what drives the sentence, drives the meaning. Favor concrete language over vague. Avoid long strings of prepositional phrases. We're not going to go through examples of all of these, but if you have questions about prepositional phrases, please reach out. I'm happy to meet and talk about them. I enjoyed that. Employ adjectives and adverbs only when they contribute to something new to the meaning of the sentence. Again, how do you make a decision on whether you use an adjective or an adverb, something that's describing something else, describing a noun or a verb? If it's necessary, you'll know it, right? But if it just seems to be filler and nice, take it out. And waste words like it, this, that, and there. Again, you can do a search and replace, or taking out that. Most that's are not necessary. Sometimes they are, so you don't just automatically do it. There at the beginning of a sentence will require that you rewrite that sentence. It is colloquial. Oftentimes, you can have much more conversational prose if you have it at the beginning of a sentence, but it is a pronoun and it has to refer back to something specific. Otherwise, you're going into this kind of vague, general, abstract. Well, it was the best of times, right? It was the worst of times. What is it? What are those times? And so notice how vague it becomes quickly. So that favoring strong, specific, robust action verbs. Think about scrutinize, dissect, recount, capture versus have, do, or show. It may be that you, if you're having a problem getting your ideas across, that you may just have a verb problem more than anything else. And limit your use of is, am, was, were, be, being, been, those kind of be forms of the verb, just because they force you to write generally wordier sentences and weaker sentences, interestingly enough. And so here are some examples. What is interesting about viruses is that their genetic stock is meager. And you can just say viruses originate from a surprisingly meager genetic stock. Nouns anchor those abstract ideas in concrete languages and images. So again, thinking about what's in that kind of lens and what's clear. So you can illustrate abstract concepts using real life examples, or limit your abstract nouns and especially nominalizations. And if you don't know what nominalizations are, I'll give you just a quick kind of set of examples, but I'll also refer you to the zombie noun TED Talk that Helen Sword does. So the children demonstrated that their engagement through their participation in the arrangement of activities. And so it's engagement and participation here that are the challenging ones. We don't know what engagement is, and we don't know what participation is, and activities is pretty vague as well. So when we say that, you can say children engaged in many different activities, which is also a little vague, but it's more clear than the prior sentence. And then this revision is much clearer. Children played games, they sang songs, and they told stories. And you can give an example of what each of those were for that. This is what I'm going to refer you to. We're not going to stop here for long. We don't have time to watch it. It's about 8 minutes or so. If you haven't already seen it, I love it. It's this animated description of what a nominalization is. And a nominalization is a nominalization, which is also hilarious. And that's because if you look at zombie nouns, they are a combination of a verb and ITO or TION or ION, MENT. We put these endings on them. So if you've ever created a new word and you're like, well, I'm going to create this, I intend, and you go intention. Well, now I've got intention. It's now a noun, right? It's a thing. Just by adding TION, well, okay. So you know how to create new words. But all of these here in this in black, destabilization, conclusion, demonstration, an analysis, or even indication, all of these are nominalization. They take something that is a verb, which describes an action, destabilize, conclude, demonstrate, analyze, or indicate, and they put an ending on it, and it makes it into a noun. It can be super, super useful for academics to talk about something that is a process of destabilization, right? That's complex, that pulls a lot of things together, but also notice that it goes really abstract very quickly. So if you get feedback that your writing is too abstract or people are having a hard time following it, it may be a problem with nominalizations and for something for you to kind of pay attention to. And it can be thinking about ecosystem destabilization can be the consequence of invasion. Here we have two nominalizations, but ecosystems can be destabilized by invasion. Or if you were to flip it around, you could say invasion destabilizes ecosystem. That's an even additional revision for that. Basically what you take again is a verb, which is an action, and you add an ending to it that turns it into a noun. Really, really common in academic writing, but it often forces you to use those being forms of the verb instead of the action form of a verb. So performance is rather something was performed. Again, I think Writer's Diet is a super cool app. I keep promoting it, but we'll have to see. This is an example, by the way, of I just dumped in a portion of a chapter that I had been writing this is ages ago, but tell me where it is that, and I have a lot of zombie nouns. But the other ones, I did not do this, by the way, thinking, oh, well, I should craft something I did really just take a page and put it in there. And I was very pleased to see that it was not flabby or heart attack zone. Hopefully, what you want to be thinking about is your short-term and your long-term training, skill development for developing the expertise in your field. Again, thinking cautiously about how we're using tools. And I think Lauren did a great job of describing perhaps the reasons why you might choose to cognitively offload by using strategically something to generate content or edit content for you. If depending on if it's an assignment that doesn't relate to your long-term kind of professional goals. But if you're looking at doing training and being able to communicate in your field more clearly, Maybe spending some time figuring out like how are you going to do that? What are some of the strategies that you can use in order to clarify, right? And connect with your readers and be able to get them to see what it is that you see through words. Really helpful. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.